All right, hey, welcome back, gang. This is part two of the chapter 5 video. So we left off here. I was going to talk a little bit about price indexes. So we had been talking about inflation and real GDP and things like that. Price indexes are little tools that economists use to measure an average price level. We can use those to estimate inflation and to compare dollar values and prices over time. So inflation, you probably already know this, but inflation just refers to an average increase in price level. So, on average, we all know the prices more often than not tend to go up a little bit. About 1 to 3% per year is pretty normal. That's what inflation is. So it doesn't mean every price goes up at the same rate. It's just kind of an average. Deflation refers to a decrease in the average price level. Relatively rare. It might seem like a good thing, but it's really not. Deflation is generally a sign that something's really bad in the economy. So what we really want is pretty kind of low, steady inflation of 1, 2, 3%. That's pretty good. So to compute a price index, here's what economists do. They create what's called a market basket, which means they just kind of take a sampling of the things that are commonly bought by most people out there. Commonly purchased goods and services. They look at the price of each of those items in each year. They track the prices of all those things throughout the year, basically add up the cost of the entire market basket and just look at how it changes from year to year. And then to actually create the price index, they just divide the price of the market basket in the current year, whatever year they're trying to calculate it for, divide it by the base year. So the base year is completely an arbitrary choice. They just kind of pick a year and say, we're going to compare everything to its price in this year. So it's a simple little division thing, and then multiply by 100 commonly. So here's an example. If I were to do a price index of the things that I commonly have purchased over time, here might be a sampling of what I would have spent on these things in 2010, what I spent in 2017. You can see that my entertainment budget has gone down considerably because I've had some kids in those years. But if we take the price in the current year divided by the base year, if we make the base year 2010, let's say, then to compute Rob's price index, RPI, for 2017, it would just be 1555 divided by 1230, multiply by 100, and you get 126.4. So the interpretation of that number, 126.4, means that the prices in 2017 for what I purchased were 26.4% higher than in the base year, or I spent 26.4% more. But that's the interpretation. That's very important of all these price indexes. A number above 100 means you spend more than in the base year. If you got a number like 84, that would mean you spent 84% of the prices in the base year. That didn't make much sense, probably. Let's try it here. The tables here are actually in your exercises for Chapter 5. You'll be using these. So the one on the left shows you a price index called the implicit price deflator, or most people call this the GDP deflator. So then the column on the right shows nominal GDP. So nominal GDP is not real GDP, it's just GDP in current year prices of each of those years. To calculate real GDP from that, you want to take the nominal GDP divided by the GDP deflator for that year. So there's an example at the bottom, and I won't go through the math, but nominal GDP, you can see on the table for 2008 was 14,291.5. That's actually $14.291 trillion. Real GDP was $14.9 trillion. So it went up because 2008 is before the base year. And you can tell that because the deflator in the base year is always 100, because it's your reference point. So you can see the fact that the GDP deflator for 2010 is 100. That tells you that's the base year. So to calculate real GDP for 2008, what we're doing is taking all that stuff that was produced in 2008 and inflating it up to 2010 prices. Hopefully that makes sense. The consumer price index on the right is a bit more commonly used price index. You've probably heard of that. That table's kind of funny because look how it says CPI 1982 through 84 equals 100. So what they did for some reason is they used an average of that 2 or 3 year period as the base year. So you can think of it as 1983 essentially as the base year. So all these numbers reflect how much higher prices are since about 1983. So for 2000, you see the CPI is 172.2. That means prices in 2000 were 72.2% higher than they were in about 83. All right. Now, what if we don't really care about the base year specifically? Here's a problem like that, and you'll be doing problems like this in your exercise. In this table, remember the base year is like 1983. What if I gave you this table and said, okay, an average smartphone costs $400 in 2000. What would it most likely cost in 2010? Well, the way you can do that is we basically just assume that, remember, the CPI tells you an average price level. So if you calculate the percent change in CPI between 2000 and 2010, that's a measure of the average inflation rate. And I'm not showing you the math here, but if you need help, ask. But to do that, use the percent change in CPI between 2000 and 2010, you find an inflation rate of 26.6%. So then it would be reasonable to assume that a smartphone would have increased by about 26.6% over that same time period. That might not be exactly right, but it's a pretty good estimate. So if you do that math, you get a price of 506.40. Another way to do the same problem, the way that I really like to do these, is just to set up a ratio like the one at the bottom there. The price of the good in year one divided by the price in year two is going to be equal to the CPI in year one divided by the CPI in year two. So in this case, that would be 400 over X. X is your year two, the unknown year, 2010. 400 over X is going to equal the ratio of 172.2 over 215. Cross multiply and solve for X. You're going to get the same answer. Anyway, there are two ways of doing that. Take the pick. I don't really care how you do it. Checking on the time. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but how unemployment is defined is discussed in the book. I think you can probably read that and make sense of it on your own. But basically, understand that the unemployment rate looks at only people who are looking and available for work. So there are plenty of people out there who are disabled, or they're retired, or they're 6 years old and they're in kindergarten. There are all kinds of people who are not in the labor force. They're not included in the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate looks at the total labor force, which is people available and looking for work, and then asks how many of those are unemployed. That's how you calculate the unemployment rate. I think this is the last slide. The book talks about 3 types of unemployment. I'll let you read those for yourselves. But understand that there's a labor market out there with supply and demand. The demand for labor is basically driven by businesses trying to hire people. The supply of labor is people going out there offering their work, trying to find a job. The forces of supply and demand work just like in any other market. There's an equilibrium, and the intersection of supply and demand determines that equilibrium and determines the real equilibrium wage. The natural rate of unemployment is considered at 4 to 6%. So we should never get to 0% unemployment, because there's always going to be some frictional and structural unemployment. If you haven't read it already, see what those terms mean for yourselves, but you should understand that some unemployment is normal. We almost never get below 4%, although I think we're very close to that right now. Cyclical unemployment is determined by the ups and downs of the economy, so that's the trouble sign to look for. All right, last slide here. I like to throw in a bonus point opportunity every once in a while, so if you will email or text me the following, I'll add a bonus point just for watching the videos. Chapter 5 video was filmed on my front porch swing. That's worth a bonus point. All right, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions.